It's a beautiful country, a great place to live and work and raise our families. It's our job to protect this country, to see that no harm comes to the people or the land. It's our tradition to be ready at all times to respond to any threat, and that includes any threat of damage to our environment. Our work brings us into daily contact with the environment. If we're careless, any one of us could cause a major environmental accident. And if we do, we are legally liable for the consequences. Due diligence is our primary defense when an environmental accident occurs. Makes good sense to protect the environment. After all, it means a better world for ourselves and for our children. But it's also a legal responsibility that applies to every individual in Maritime Command. The law says that we have an obligation to exercise due diligence when we're involved in activities that have the potential to harm the environment. So we need to understand exactly what that phrase means.
Due diligence is defined as such a measure of prudence or activity as is properly to be expected from and ordinarily exercised by a reasonable and prudent person under the particular circumstances, not measured by any absolute standard, but depending on the relative facts of the special case.
In other words, no two situations are the same, so we need to use good old common sense. The environment is not some kind of abstract idea. It's where we live and work and where we play. Many of Maritime Command's activities have a potential impact on the environment. Whenever they do, we're required to exercise a reasonable standard of care. What's reasonable? Well, there are no precise rules. It depends on the situation. If you never get into a canoe, you'll never get dunked, but you won't have the opportunity to enjoy the sport either. So you take sensible precautions to avoid accidents. Well, that's the approach we have to take when it comes to protecting ourselves and protecting the environment. Due diligence means doing what a reasonable and prudent person would do in the same circumstances. We do know that even a few liters of oil can contaminate millions of liters of water, so any fuel transfer operation has the potential to have a huge impact on the environment. It makes a lot more sense to prevent pollution than to try to clean it up afterwards. That's why we have procedures to ensure that spills don't happen, and a response plan to deal with any mishaps. When you're ready for trouble, you can usually avoid it or minimize the impact. The fact is, there are very few true accidents. Almost every so-called accident could have been prevented by taking reasonable care. If there's an environmental accident and you're involved, there's one critical question that you'll have to answer. Did you exercise due diligence? Now, if you can show that you did everything that a reasonable and prudent person would do, you're in the clear. If not only might D&D be held responsible, but you as an individual could be held legally liable for the consequences, and that's trouble you don't need. Now, we can't afford to wait for environmental problems to happen. We have to be proactive and prevent trouble before it starts. Due diligence is a moving target. Conditions are constantly changing, and we have to respond quickly and effectively. There are no precise rules to say when we've done enough. We have to use common sense and constantly ask ourselves, what would the reasonable and prudent person do in these circumstances? No matter how big your ship is, you always have to be on the alert and ready to take action to prevent trouble. As the situation evolves, your response has to change, and that's a rule of thumb that can help you prevent troubles and keep the environment as clean and unpolluted as we all want it to be. Canadians care deeply about the environment, and Canadian law reflects that fact. The law makes environmental protection a personal obligation. If a system fails, we can't just walk away and say, that's not my job. We have to personally respond to protect the environment and to protect ourselves from legal liability. This personal responsibility goes right up the chain of command, affecting anyone who's directly involved in causing environmental damage or allowing it to happen. This includes the Chief of Defense Staff, the Deputy Minister, and even the Minister. If, for example, an underground fuel tank failed inspection tests and no appropriate steps were taken to remove or replace the tank, and then a major spillage occurs and finds its way into a nearby sewer system, it is likely that due diligence obligations were not met by the individuals involved. Knowing that the tank must be replaced is not enough. A plan to rectify the problem must be put in place, and steps must be taken to implement that plan. In a case like this, liability might be assessed against a variety of individuals. But if inspectors reported the original condition to their supervisors and managers did not take the proper steps to correct the situation, then the managers would have failed their due diligence obligations and could be charged. Due diligence doesn't require perfection or superhuman efforts, but it does demand a high standard of awareness at all levels of command and decisive, prompt, and continuing action to protect the environment. Our newest frigates are incredibly complex vessels. It takes high standards of performance to pilot these ships and well-developed systems to maintain those standards. We have to take the same approach in protecting the environment. We establish minimum baseline standards and then set up systems to ensure that the standards are met. First of all, personnel have to be appropriately trained. Then there have to be monitoring systems in place to detect problems. We also need a reporting procedure to ensure compliance and to report any incidents of non-compliance in a timely manner. There must be an emergency response plan to minimize potential damage, and we need qualified people who are responsible for environmental matters. When we establish standards and ensure that they're observed, we're fulfilling our due diligence obligations. For example, in the extreme conditions of wartime, it might be reasonable and prudent to dump fuel over the side to protect human life. Under normal peacetime conditions, on the other hand, we dispose of shipboard waste very carefully to avoid any damage to the environment. The circumstances are very different, but in each case, due diligence is our guide.
There's only one way to keep a ship running efficiently and safely, and that's teamwork. Each person has a specific role, a specific set of responsibilities, and if any of those responsibilities is not met, it could result in a disaster. It's the same throughout the ship. Only tight teamwork and a high degree of preparedness can prevent accidents and safeguard human life. Protecting the environment requires the same spirit of teamwork, the same understanding that we are personally responsible for ensuring that no damage is caused by anything we do or fail to do.
They say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And it's true, especially when the cure is at our own expense. The one sure way to avoid paying that price is to remember the principle of due diligence and practice it at all times. Ready?
Ready, sir.
Protecting the environment is part of our duty to protect the country. It's our tradition and our personal responsibility.